You want to know what it sounds like when your own parents decide you're disposable? It starts with the heavy thud of a lock. The sound of them barring a door from the outside, turning a room into a tomb, and the second sound? Their laughter. Can you believe that? My mother and father, the two people who were supposed to protect me, stood on a perfectly manicured lawn, sipping champagne, and listened to me screaming as I suffocated. They watched my face swell, watched me claw at the glass, and decided the party was more important than my life. They chose their flawless public image over their own daughter. That night, as I lay dying on a cold marble floor, I made a choice, too. I would dedicate every breath I had left to systematically destroying theirs. I would bleed their empire dry, take every stock, every property, every last dollar, and leave them with nothing but the bitter taste of their own cruelty. They wanted to erase me. Instead, I erased them from the world they built. This is how I did it. Before that lock clicked, my life looked like a fairy tale. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Sterling, were giants in luxury real estate. Sterling Properties wasn't just a company, it was a dynasty. Our name was carved into the fanciest buildings in the city, a monument to their ambition and, as I'd learned, their absolute ruthlessness. We lived on an estate that was basically a private resort. Acres of green lawn, a stable of horses, and a house so big you could get lost in it. Emotionally, I usually was. To everyone else, we were the perfect family. Richard, the powerful, charming dad, Eleanor, the elegant, graceful mom, and me, their daughter, Alex. But daughter was just a job title. I was a prop. I was their most valuable asset, something to be managed and shown off. My good grades were proof of their smarts. My horse riding ribbons were proof of their good breeding. My entire childhood was a performance. And my parents were the directors who demanded perfection. In our house, love wasn't something you felt, it was something you earned. A perfect report card got me a stiff nod from my father at dinner. Winning a horse show might get a quick, thin smile from my mother. But messing up the script, a C+ on a test, falling off a horse, having my own opinion, was met with this chilling disappointment. A cold, silent treatment that felt 1,000 times worse than being yelled at. They never asked about my day, they asked about my accomplishments. They never asked how I felt, only what I'd achieved. Their obsession with their image was total. Any problem, anything ugly, had to be hidden. When I was 10, I broke my arm falling off a swing. My mother's first worry wasn't my pain, but how a cast would look at the annual governor's ball. She actually spent an hour with her stylist trying to figure out how to hide the plaster under silk. The pool house was my whole life in one building. It was beautiful, all glass and white marble, set way back from the main house. It was my space where I could relax and stay out of their hair. To their friends, it was just another generous gift. "We gave Alexandra her own little villa," my mother would say with a wave of her hand. I knew what it really was. It was a beautiful prison, a place to keep me separate and contained. I should have seen what they were capable of. I'd seen glimpses of it in their business dealings. I once overheard my father on the phone, his voice dripping with satisfaction, as he talked about how he'd financially destroyed a smaller competitor. He didn't just win, he wiped the guy out. Drove him into bankruptcy, made him sell his family home, and then Dad bought that same house at auction for almost nothing. He laughed about it with my mother at dinner. "He should have known better than to swim with sharks," he said. Mom just smiled. "He should have known sharks can smell blood in the water." They were predators in expensive clothes, and I was their cub, completely unaware that they'd eat their own. The night it all came apart was the night of their biggest party, the Sterling Annual Summer Gala. It was a huge deal. Hundreds of the city's most powerful people were all over our lawn, their laughter mixing with the clinking of champagne glasses. My parents were in heaven, gliding through the crowd like king and queen. My job, as usual, was to be the perfect daughter in a designer dress they'd picked out. I was 16. It all started with a shrimp puff. I'm deathly allergic to shellfish. My mother knew this, but she always called it a childish fuss and promised me the caterers were told. But in the chaos, someone made a mistake. A minute after I ate it, I felt it, that terrifying tightness in my throat. I couldn't get a full breath. A hot rash was crawling up my neck. My lips and eyes started to swell. Panic took over. I found my mother by the fountain, charming some city councilman. I grabbed her arm, my voice just a strangled whisper. "Mom, I can't breathe. The shrimp. I need my EpiPen. It's in your purse." Her smile never dropped, but her eyes went cold as ice. She saw my swollen face, saw me gasping for air, and her first thought wasn't about me. It was about the scene I was making. "For heaven's sake, Alex, not now!" She gripped my arm hard, and forcing a smile at the councilman, said, feigning politeness, "You'll have to excuse us. My daughter is just a little overwhelmed." My father appeared next to her, his face a mask of public charm, hiding pure fury. They rushed me away from the party lights, past the glowing pool and toward the dark pool house. I was stumbling, my vision getting blurry. "Dad, please, call 911. "Don't be so dramatic. We can't have sirens here. Do you have any idea who's at this party?" They shoved me inside. My knees buckled and I hit the cold marble floor. I was on the ground, clawing at my throat as it closed up. My mother said, her voice sounding annoyed and far away, "Just lie down. Drink some water. You'll be fine." I looked up at them, begging with my eyes. They just saw a problem that needed to be hidden. And then I heard it, the heavy of the door being blocked. Pure terror washed over me. I scrambled to the glass, pounding on it with what little strength I had left. I screamed, though no real sound came out. And I watched them. I saw them walk back to the party. My father put his arm around my mother, and she laughed at something he whispered. They took fresh glasses of champagne from a waiter. And then they turned and looked right at the pool house. They saw me. They saw their daughter suffocating, collapsing against the glass. They saw me, and then they turned their backs and disappeared into the crowd. In the dark, my fingers found the only thing I owned that they hadn't given me, a small silver locket from my grandmother. I clutched it so hard the chain snapped and the clasp dug into my palm, a sharp, real pain in the middle of all the terror. That little cut would become a promise to myself. My parents didn't save me. A caterer did. A young guy who came around back to get empty trays saw me passed out on the floor. He didn't think twice. He picked up a heavy planter and smashed the glass door open. He was the one who called the ambulance. The last thing I remember before passing out was the sound of sirens. The exact sound my parents feared more than my own death. I woke up in a hospital. The doctor said I'd had a severe anaphylactic shock. The love I'd wanted my whole life was a lie. The girl who wanted her parents' approval had died on that pool house floor, and someone new and much, much colder was born. We never, ever spoke of what happened. In my family, the official story is the only story. Life went back to normal, but I was different. I was no longer playing my part. I was a spy in my own house, quietly watching, waiting. The little crescent-shaped scar on my palm was my constant reminder. Every time I saw it, I remembered the sound of that lock, the sight of their backs, and my promise got harder. My parents thought my new silence was me finally growing up. They were thrilled when I said I wanted to major in finance and corporate law. "She has her father's head for business," Richard would brag. They thought I'd just slot right into the family business. They paid for everything: the Ivy League tuition, the fancy apartment, a huge allowance. They had no idea they were paying for their own destruction. College was my training camp. I wasn't just studying, I was building an arsenal. I learned everything about hostile takeovers, forensic accounting, all of it. I spent my nights in the library, tearing apart the financial reports of their rivals, learning how the sharks hunted. I got internships at small, hungry firms, the kind my father looked down on. I built a network of people my parents had burned over the years. Ex-employees, crushed rivals. I collected their stories and their anger. They became my secret army. My plan was simple: take Sterling Properties. It was a private company. My parents owned 90%. The other 10% was held by a few of their oldest friends. My parents thought their loyalty was unbreakable, but loyalty is usually just about self-interest. My first step was to get that 10%. I used my allowance money to hire a law firm in another state. We set up a bunch of shell corporations with boring, forgettable names. Then I started the hunt. I had my lawyers approach each of the 5 minority shareholders, one by one. I was patient. The first was an old man named Arthur, whose wife had huge medical bills. My shell corp made him an all-cash offer for his 2% stake, way over market value. He finally sold. Next was a couple who needed money for their grandkids' college. They sold their 3%. It took me 3 years, but I slowly and quietly bought up every single one of those shares. My parents had no clue. They thought their loyal friends were still on their side, but now their own daughter owned a 10% stake in their company. But 10% wasn't enough to take over. I needed the kill. They'd just let the Trojan horse inside the gates. They gave me access to everything. Their files, their servers, their private books. I'd lock my office door at 2 a.m. and dig. And then I found it. It was worse than I ever imagined. A massive, sophisticated system of fraud. Shell companies to inflate construction costs. Secret payments to city officials. They were undervaluing properties for taxes while overvaluing them for bank loans. It was a whole empire built on lies. The key that would bring it all down was a single, massive loan they'd taken out to fund a new development. It was secured by everything: the company, the assets, and, best of all, our family estate. The loan had strict rules, and my parents' creative accounting meant they were breaking them. The evidence I had was a ticking time bomb. The loan was up for renewal in 2 months. If the bank found out, they'd demand all the money back at once. Sterling Properties would be bankrupt overnight. They would lose everything. I finally had my weapon. All I had to do was pull the trigger. I didn't choose a public fight. I chose the one place they felt completely safe, the main boardroom on the top floor of their building. Using my rights as a 10% shareholder, I called an emergency board meeting. The agenda was vague: a review of corporate governance. My parents were annoyed, but not worried. They walked in that morning looking bored, ready to dismiss a minor problem. They sat at the head of the giant mahogany table, my father tapping his pen, my mother looking at her nails. Then I walked in. You could feel the air change in the room. Shock. Confusion. My father spoke first, his voice tight. "Alex? What are you doing here? This is a private shareholders meeting." I walked to the empty chair across from them. "I know," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I'm the shareholder." I opened my briefcase and slid a thick document across the table. It landed in front of my father with a soft thud. "This proves that 100% of the minority shares, 10% of this company, have been transferred to a holding company. I am the sole director." My father's face was a mask of disbelief as he flipped through the pages. His hands started to shake. My mother went white. "Arthur? The Blakes? They sold to you?" she whispered. "They sold to a generous buyer who made them an offer they couldn't refuse," I said. "They put their families first. You should try it sometime." My father slammed the document down. "Cute stunt, Alex. So you own 10%. What do you want? Spit it out." I smiled. It was his smile, cold and predatory. "I'm not here for a handout, Dad. I'm here for the company." I laid it all out. The shell companies, the fake invoices, the bribes. With every word, the color drained from their faces. Then I got to the heart of it. And then there's the massive loan from United Capital Bank. The one secured by everything you own. The one whose rules you've been breaking for years. I paused. "I have a meeting with their chief risk officer tomorrow at 9 a.m. to show them my findings. And another one with the IRS at noon. By lunchtime tomorrow, you'll be finished." That's when he finally broke. My father shot to his feet, his face turning purple. "You wouldn't dare! After everything we gave you, this life, this company, it was all for you!" The rage I had buried for a decade came out, cold and sharp. "Everything? You gave me a trust fund and you left me to die. You stood on a lawn drinking champagne while I suffocated. You chose this company over your own daughter. Now I'm just returning the favor. I'm choosing this company over you." Dead silence. The same suffocating silence from the pool house. "You have two options," I said. "Option A, I go to my meetings tomorrow. The company is destroyed. The sterling name means fraud. You lose everything, and you probably go to prison." I leaned forward. "Or option B, you sign over your 90% to me, right now, for $1. In exchange, this mess disappears. You get to walk away with your personal savings and whatever is left of your reputation. You lose your empire, but you keep your freedom." My mother started to cry. My father just stared at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. He knew I had him. I had learned from the best, after all. The lawyer, already saving himself, slid the transfer documents in front of them. I watched their hands, the same hands that locked me in, tremble as they signed. First, Richard, his name an angry slash. Then Eleanor, her signature a watery mess. It was done. With the stroke of a pen, the Sterling dynasty was over, and a new one had just begun. The next few days were a blur of calculated moves. This wasn't a party. It was a cleanup. I immediately canceled my meetings with the bank and the IRS. Instead, I met with the bank as the new owner. I showed them my plan to restructure, using the very evidence I'd gathered to prove how I would stabilize the company. I got a new line of credit and fixed the loan. I fired the old guard and started cleaning up the mess my parents had made. My final move against them was cold, and official. Done through lawyers. Just how they... So, where are they now? Their friends disappeared the second the money did. They had to sell my mother's jewelry and my father's classic cars just to afford a condo in a part of the state they used to make fun of. Their perfect life sold for parts. They tried to contact me once. A letter from a cheap lawyer threatening to sue me for coercion. My legal team sent back a single piece of paper. It was a copy of my hospital report from that night. I'd circled the doctor's notes in red ink. Condition exacerbated by a significant delay in receiving medical attention. Clear signs of parental neglect. We never heard from them again. I didn't keep the estate. Too many ghosts. I sold it and put the money back into the company, which I rebuilt from the ground up on a foundation of honesty. I'm more successful than they ever were, but my success isn't for anyone's approval. It's just mine. Sometimes, late at night in my office, the one that used to be his, I'll rub the little white scar on my palm, the mark from my grandmother's locket. For years, it was a reminder of their betrayal, but it feels different now. It's not a symbol of what they did to me, but of the fact that I survived. It's a reminder that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest weapons, and sometimes the only way out of a cage is to melt it down and make your own key. I am finally free. They say living well is the best revenge, but let's be honest, sometimes revenge is the best revenge. The world is full of people who think they're above consequences, who believe their power makes them untouchable. But sooner or later, everyone has to pay their debts. Have you ever had to get your own back on someone who truly deserved it? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one.